Isaiah Washington stares at his phone, watching the viral video of himself being discriminated against reach 50 million views. A female news anchor announces the unprecedented $30 million settlement against Lincoln Airlines. Isaiah's phone rings, his lawyer calling about the airline's CEO requesting a private meeting. The flashback begins. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe justice should always prevail. Now, let's rewind to see how a routine flight turned into one of the most significant discrimination cases in aviation history. The terminal at Atlanta International Airport buzzed with the usual Monday morning chaos. Dr. Isaiah Washington checked his watch, 6:45 a.m., plenty of time before his 8:30 a.m. departure to Boston. The prestigious medical conference where he was presenting his groundbreaking neural regeneration research was less than 8 hours away. At 38, Isaiah had established himself as one of the country's leading neurosurgeons. Harvard Medical School graduate, former chief resident at Johns Hopkins, and now head of neurosurgery at Atlanta Memorial Hospital. His credentials were impeccable, his reputation stellar. But none of that changed how some people saw him the moment he stepped into certain spaces. He approached the Lincoln Airlines premium check-in counter, platinum member card ready alongside his ID. "Good morning," he greeted the agent with a warm smile. "Dr. Washington, checking in for flight 2187 to Boston." The agent glanced up, her eyes doing that quick double-take Isaiah had grown accustomed to over the years, the momentary disconnect between his professional title and his appearance. "First class?" she asked, an edge of doubt in her voice. "Yes, seat 2A," Isaiah confirmed, sliding his ID and platinum member card forward. The agent's demeanor shifted subtly as she processed his boarding pass. "Of course, Dr. Washington. My apologies for the confusion." Isaiah nodded politely. These small interactions, these microscopic aggressions, were so commonplace they barely registered anymore. Or rather, they registered, but he'd learned to process them without letting them disrupt his day. After clearing security, Isaiah settled in the first-class lounge, reviewing his presentation on his tablet one final time. His research on neural pathway regeneration following traumatic brain injuries had shown remarkable promise in clinical trials. Today's presentation could open doors for funding that would bring the treatment to underserved communities, a personal mission since his childhood in South Atlanta. His phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife, Lauren, "Good luck today. Aaliyah wants you to call her tonight after your speech. She's so proud of her dad." A smile warmed his face. His 16-year-old daughter was his world. Despite the divorce 3 years ago, he and Lauren had maintained a respectful co-parenting relationship. Isaiah's demanding career had taken its toll on their marriage, but never on his relationship with Aaliyah. When boarding was announced, Isaiah gathered his carry-on, a sleek leather briefcase containing his laptop, tablet, research notes, and a change of clothes, and headed to gate B22. The gate agent smiled professionally. "Good morning, Dr. Washington. We're ready to begin boarding with our first-class passengers." Isaiah handed over his boarding pass and made his way down the jet bridge. As he approached the aircraft door, he noticed the flight attendant's expression shift almost imperceptibly as she saw him. Her name tag read Amber Reynolds. "Boarding pass?" she asked, her tone clipped. Isaiah presented his ticket, which she scrutinized longer than necessary before returning it with a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Seat 2A is to your left," she said, already looking past him to the next passenger. Isaiah found his seat in the second row of the first-class cabin. He stored his briefcase in the overhead compartment and settled into the comfortable window seat. The cabin was still mostly empty, with just a few other passengers finding their places. A few minutes later, a well-dressed older man with silver hair approached the row. Gerald Whitfield, as Isaiah would later learn, was a 62-year-old real estate developer from Atlanta's wealthiest suburb. He glanced at Isaiah, then at his own boarding pass, a flash of displeasure crossing his features. Gerald flagged down Amber, who quickly approached. "Is there a problem, sir?" she asked, her tone instantly solicitous. "I believe I'm in 2B, Gerald said, gesturing vaguely toward Isaiah, but there seems to be some confusion." Isaiah, sensing the implication, discreetly activated the recording function on his phone, a habit he'd developed over years of navigating spaces where his presence was questioned. He placed the phone in his jacket pocket, the microphone exposed just enough to capture audio clearly. "I'm in 2A, Isaiah offered pleasantly. "Looks like we're row mates for this flight." Gerald barely acknowledged him, continuing to address Amber. "I usually prefer not to have a row mate in first class." "I understand completely, Mr. Whitfield," Amber nodded sympathetically. "Unfortunately, we have a full first-class cabin today. Let me see if there's anything I can do to make you more comfortable." Isaiah noted how Amber had addressed Gerald by name despite not having checked his boarding pass yet, a courtesy not extended to him moments earlier. As more passengers boarded, a woman of Asian descent took the aisle seat across from Isaiah. She offered a friendly nod as she settled in. Her name tag identified her as Dr. Sophia Chen, and she was carrying a similar conference program to Isaiah's. "Boston Medical Conference?" Isaiah asked conversationally. "Yes," Sophia replied. "I'm presenting research on autoimmune responses to synthetic grafts." "You're attending too?" "Presenting as well." "Neural regeneration therapies." "Dr. Washington?" Sophia's eyes lit with recognition. "I read your paper in the Journal of Neuroscience last month. Your work is groundbreaking." Before Isaiah could respond, Gerald shifted pointedly in his seat and cleared his throat. Amber returned with a complimentary glass of champagne for Gerald, though the pre-flight beverage service hadn't officially begun. "Here you are, Mr. Whitfield," she said warmly. "Is there anything else I can get for you before takeoff?" Gerald accepted the champagne with a satisfied nod, shooting a smug glance at Isaiah. "That's very kind of you, Amber. This is why I always fly Lincoln Airlines." Sophia raised an eyebrow at the interaction, meeting Isaiah's gaze briefly. No words were needed, they both recognized what was happening. The boarding continued as Isaiah observed Amber and Gerald exchange glances throughout the pre-flight preparations. He kept his expression neutral, his posture relaxed, even as he documented every interaction. Years of facing subtle discriminations had taught him valuable lessons: stay calm, collect evidence, choose your battles. And this, he sensed, might become a battle worth fighting. The first-class cabin was nearly full now, passengers settling into their seats as final boarding announcements echoed through the plane. Isaiah had just pulled out his tablet to review his presentation notes one last time when Gerald abruptly stood up. "Excuse me," Gerald said loudly, deliberately addressing Amber, who was helping another passenger. "I believe there's been a mistake with the seating arrangements." Amber immediately abandoned what she was doing and hurried over. "What seems to be the problem, Mr. Whitfield?" Gerald gestured dismissively toward Isaiah. "I'm certain this is my row. I always sit in row 2 when I fly first class with Lincoln. I'm a Diamond Elite member." Isaiah remained calm, though he was fully aware this confrontation was about more than just seating. He reached for his boarding pass. "I believe there's a misunderstanding. My assigned seat is 2A. Gerald scoffed. "There must be some error in the system." Amber turned to Isaiah, her expression shifting from the warmth she'd shown Gerald to cool professionalism. "May I see your boarding pass, sir?" Isaiah handed it over, noting that she hadn't asked to see Gerald's pass despite him being the one raising the issue. "Of course." Amber examined his boarding pass with exaggerated thoroughness, as if searching for evidence of forgery. After several seconds, she reluctantly nodded. "This does show seat 2A. Perhaps you could double-check his ticket," Gerald suggested, his tone implying doubt about Isaiah's legitimacy. Without hesitation, Amber turned to her tablet. "Could I see your ID as well, sir?" she asked Isaiah. Isaiah provided his driver's license while maintaining his composure. "Is this standard procedure when a passenger questions someone else's assigned seat?" Amber ignored the question, comparing his ID to the boarding pass and tablet information. Meanwhile, Gerald remained standing, looming over Isaiah as if his physical presence might intimidate him into surrendering the seat. Sophia, observing from across the aisle, leaned forward. "Is everything all right?" "Just a seating confusion," Amber replied curtly without looking at her. Finally, she handed Isaiah's ID and boarding pass back. "The system confirms you're in the correct seat, sir." Gerald's jaw tightened. "This is highly unusual. I've never had issues with my preferred seating arrangements before." "I apologize for the inconvenience, Mr. Whitfield," Amber said, her voice dripping with sympathy. "Rest assured, we'll make note of your seating preferences for future flights. Please, let me know if there's anything I can do to make your journey more comfortable today." As Gerald reluctantly sat down, he muttered just loud enough to be heard, "First class isn't what it used to be. Too many people who don't belong taking up space." Amber, rather than addressing the clearly inappropriate comment, simply smiled placatingly at Gerald. "I completely understand, sir. Times are changing." Isaiah activated his smartwatch recording as a backup, keeping his movements casual as he adjusted his watch. The cabin continued filling with passengers, many witnessing the interaction with varying degrees of interest or discomfort. Sophia caught Isaiah's eye, her expression conveying both sympathy and indignation. She leaned slightly toward him. "That was completely inappropriate," she said quietly. "It's not my first encounter with this kind of behavior," Isaiah replied softly. "Unfortunately, it probably won't be my last." Amber returned moments later to check that Gerald's seatbelt was properly fastened, a courtesy not extended to Isaiah. As she leaned over to adjust Gerald's seat, she whispered something that made him chuckle. The exchange was brief but deliberate, establishing a clear alliance between them. The flight attendants began their pre-departure routine, and Amber performed the safety demonstration. Isaiah noticed how she made eye contact with virtually every first-class passenger during her instructions, except him. Throughout these interactions, Isaiah maintained his professional demeanor. His training as a surgeon had honed his ability to remain steady under pressure, to compartmentalize emotions that might interfere with the task at hand. But behind his calm exterior, his mind catalogued each slight, each microaggression, connecting them to a lifetime of similar experiences. He remembered being the only black student in his advanced placement classes in high school, how teachers would express surprise at his test scores. He recalled the security guards who followed him in department stores even when he was wearing his doctor's coat. He thought about the patients who requested a different surgeon upon meeting him, despite his stellar reputation. Each incident formed part of a familiar pattern, a pattern now repeating itself at 30,000 feet. As the aircraft pushed back from the gate, Gerald made a show of adjusting his position to minimize contact with Isaiah, creating as much distance as possible in the adjacent seats. "I hope you're not one of those passengers who hogs the armrest," Gerald said, his tone making the subtext clear. Isaiah simply smiled. "I'm sure we can share the space equitably." Gerald snorted. "Equity. That's the problem with everything these days. Some people expecting handouts instead of earning their place." Sophia, overhearing this, interjected. "Excuse me, but that comment was completely out of line." Amber appeared immediately, as if she'd been hovering nearby. "Is there a problem here? This gentleman," Sophia gestured to Gerald, "is making inappropriate comments." "I'm simply having a conversation," Gerald replied innocently. "If people are too sensitive to handle differing opinions, perhaps they shouldn't be in first class." Amber turned to Sophia with a tight smile. "Ma'am, please allow our passengers to enjoy their flight experience without interruption. If you're uncomfortable, I'd be happy to see if we can find you another seat." Isaiah watched the exchange with careful attention, continuing to document everything. The pattern was unmistakable. Amber consistently sided with Gerald, dismissing or ignoring any problematic behavior while scrutinizing Isaiah's every move and treating Sophia's intervention as the actual disruption. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Isaiah knew this flight was quickly becoming about much more than just getting to Boston. It was becoming about accountability, about documenting and exposing the kind of everyday discrimination that so often went unchallenged because it occurred in transient spaces with little recourse for the targeted individuals. The plane lifted off, carrying with it mounting tension that seemed certain to escalate further before they reached their destination. The seatbelt sign dinged off as the aircraft reached cruising altitude. The cabin filled with the low hum of conversation and the sounds of passengers settling in for the 2-hour flight to Boston. Amber began the first-class drink service, moving methodically from the front of the cabin backward. She reached Gerald and Isaiah's row, turning first to Gerald with a warm smile. "What can I get for you to drink this morning, Mr. Whitfield?" she asked. "Scotch on the rocks," Gerald replied. "Macallan if you have it." "Of course we do," Amber assured him. "And would you care for the warm mixed nuts as well?" "Absolutely." Amber prepared his drink with flourish, presenting it on a small linen napkin alongside a crystal dish of warmed nuts. Only after serving Gerald did she turn to Isaiah, her demeanor noticeably cooler. "And for you?" she asked flatly. "Sparkling water with lime, please," Isaiah requested. Amber nodded curtly and moved to Sophia's seat across the aisle, not asking Isaiah about nuts or snacks. She returned moments later with a plastic cup of sparkling water, no ice, no lime, no napkin. "Here," she said, practically thrusting the drink at him. "I asked for lime," Isaiah reminded her gently. Amber's expression tightened. "We're running low. I'll check if there's any left after I finish serving the cabin." Isaiah nodded, placing his drink in the holder. He noticed Sophia watching the interaction with narrowed eyes. Her own drink had been served properly in a glass with a napkin. As Amber moved away, Gerald shifted in his seat, lifting his scotch for a sip. Whether intentional or not, though Isaiah suspected the former, Gerald's elbow bumped sharply against Isaiah's arm, causing the plastic cup of sparkling water to tip over and spill across Isaiah's lap an expensive charcoal suit. "Oh!" Gerald exclaimed with exaggerated surprise. "How clumsy of you to place your drink so precariously." Cold water soaked through Isaiah's pants. He remained composed despite the provocation, reaching for the small cocktail napkin Sophia quickly offered from across the aisle. "Amber!" Gerald called out. "I need some napkins here. There's been a spill." Amber rushed back, immediately focusing on Gerald. "Are you all right, Mr. Whitfield? Did any get on you?" "I'm fine," Gerald replied. "But it's made quite a mess." Amber retrieved a stack of napkins, handing them to Gerald first. "Here you are, sir." Gerald took a single napkin to dab at a non-existent spot on his sleeve, leaving Isaiah to reach for the remaining napkins himself. The water had soaked through to his skin, his presentation suit now visibly stained. "I'll need more than these," Isaiah said, gesturing to the small cocktail napkins. "That's all we have available right now," Amber replied dismissively. "You should be more careful with your beverages in first class." Isaiah met her gaze steadily. "The spill occurred when Mr. Whitfield bumped my arm. I'd appreciate proper assistance." Amber's expression hardened. "Sir, I didn't see what happened, but I'm sure it was an accident. There's no need to make accusations." "I'm not making accusations," Isaiah clarified calmly. "I'm simply stating what occurred and requesting assistance with the spill." Gerald scoffed. "Typical. Always looking to blame someone else instead of taking responsibility." "Excuse me?" Isaiah turned to face him directly. "You know exactly what I mean," Gerald continued, lowering his voice but maintaining an intensity that carried to nearby passengers. "People like you are always playing the victim. Probably got your medical degree through affirmative action too, didn't you? Taking spots from more qualified candidates." The cabin seemed to grow quiet around them as several passengers turned to observe the escalating situation. Isaiah felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the weight of having to navigate this hostile environment while maintaining his dignity. "Mr. Whitfield," Isaiah said evenly, "that comment was inappropriate and discriminatory." I'd appreciate it if you'd refrain from making assumptions about my qualifications or character based on my race. Amber inserted herself between them. Sir, she addressed Isaiah sharply, please lower your voice. You're disturbing other passengers. I'm speaking at the same volume as Mr. Whitfield, Isaiah pointed out. It sounded much louder to me, Amber countered. If you continue to cause a disturbance, I'll need to involve the captain. Sophia stood up from her seat. Excuse me, but I've been sitting right here witnessing everything. This gentleman, she nodded toward Isaiah, has been nothing but patient while enduring completely unacceptable behavior. He deserves an apology and proper assistance. Amber turned to Sophia with a tight smile. Ma'am, please return to your seat. This doesn't concern you. It concerns everyone when discrimination occurs in a public space, Sophia replied firmly. The commotion had drawn the attention of the cabin, and moments later, the captain emerged from the cockpit. Captain Harrison Palmer was a tall man in his mid-50s with a commanding presence emphasized by his crisp uniform. What seems to be the problem here? He asked, directing his question primarily to Amber. Captain Palmer, Amber began immediately, this passenger, she indicated Isaiah, has been confrontational since boarding. He's disturbing Mr. Whitfield and refusing to calm down despite multiple requests. Isaiah was momentarily stunned by the complete misrepresentation of events. That's not what happened at all, Sophia interjected. This man has been subjected to discriminatory comments and treatment. I've witnessed it all. Captain Palmer held up his hand. Ma'am, please let my crew handle this. He turned to Isaiah. Sir, I understand you might be upset, but we need to maintain a peaceful environment on this aircraft. If there's an issue with our service, you're welcome to file a complaint after we land. For now, I need you to calm down and comply with the flight attendant's instructions. Isaiah noticed the captain hadn't asked for his version of events before siding with Amber. The systematic nature of what was happening became increasingly clear. This wasn't just about one biased flight attendant or one prejudiced passenger. It was about an entire system designed to presume his guilt and deny his experience. Captain, Isaiah responded calmly, I understand your concern for the peace of the cabin. However, I want to be clear that I have remained calm throughout this interaction. What I'm experiencing is discriminatory treatment, and I'm simply requesting to be treated with the same respect as other passengers. The captain studied him for a moment, then nodded tersely. I'll have another flight attendant bring you some proper napkins for the spill. In the meantime, I ask that everyone return to their seats and enjoy the remainder of the flight without further disruption. As Captain Palmer returned to the cockpit, Isaiah caught Amber and Gerald exchanging a look of shared disdain. He adjusted his watch, ensuring it was still recording, and checked that his phone was capturing audio as well. This was no longer just about enduring a difficult flight. This was about documenting a pattern of behavior that reflected a much larger issue, one that affected countless travelers who didn't have the means or opportunity to prove what had happened to them. The flight had settled into an uneasy quiet following the confrontation. Isaiah's pants were still damp, his expensive suit now bearing a noticeable water stain. Another flight attendant, not Amber, had eventually brought him proper towels, offering a sympathetic smile but saying nothing about the earlier incident. Isaiah checked his watch. They were about halfway through the flight, and he needed to take his blood pressure medication. He had a long-standing routine of taking it at the same time each day to manage the hypertension that ran in his family. The medication was in his briefcase in the overhead compartment. He unfastened his seatbelt and began to stand. Where do you think you're going? Gerald immediately questioned, his tone accusatory. I need to access my briefcase in the overhead bin, Isaiah explained calmly. Gerald made no move to let him pass, maintaining his position as a blockade. You've been disruptive enough on this flight. Why can't you just stay in your seat like everyone else? Before Isaiah could respond, Amber appeared beside their row, as if she'd been hovering nearby waiting for another opportunity to intervene. Sir, she addressed Isaiah with obvious disapproval, the seatbelt sign isn't on, but we prefer passengers remain seated unless absolutely necessary. It is necessary, Isaiah explained. I need to take my medication, which is in my briefcase. Amber's expression remained skeptical. Couldn't you have taken it before boarding? Or perhaps you could wait until we land. We'll be in Boston in less than an hour. It's blood pressure medication that needs to be taken at specific intervals, Isaiah clarified. I take it at this time every day as prescribed by my doctor. Do you have a medical note stating you need access to this medication during flight? Amber asked, her tone suggesting this was a standard request rather than an unusual and unnecessary barrier she was creating. Isaiah felt his actual blood pressure rising despite his efforts to remain calm. I wasn't aware I needed documentation to access my own prescribed medication during a flight when the seatbelt sign is off. Gerald smirked. Some people just don't understand proper planning when traveling. I always take my medications before flights to avoid inconveniencing others. Isaiah turned to Amber. May I please access my briefcase in the overhead compartment? I really think you should have planned better, Amber insisted. Moving around the cabin creates potential safety hazards and disturbs other passengers who are trying to enjoy their flight experience. Isaiah could feel the beginning symptoms of missing his medication, a slight throbbing at his temples and the sensation of heat rising up his neck. This wasn't just about convenience, it was becoming a health concern. This is a medical necessity, he stated firmly. I need to take my medication now. Amber crossed her arms. Sir, your tone is becoming aggressive again. I'm going to have to ask you to remain in your seat. From across the aisle, Sophia stood up. This is ridiculous. He's asking to access his medication, which is his right. Without waiting for a response, she moved to the overhead bin above Isaiah's seat and opened it. Ma'am, you are not authorized to open that compartment. Amber exclaimed, reaching to stop her. Which one is your briefcase? Sophia asked Isaiah, ignoring Amber's protests. The black leather one, Isaiah replied. Sophia retrieved the briefcase and handed it to Isaiah. Here you go. Thank you, Isaiah said sincerely. Amber's face flushed with anger. Ma'am, you've directly violated flight procedures. I'll need to report this to the captain. Please do, Sophia replied coolly. And while you're at it, explain why you're preventing a passenger from accessing necessary medication. Gerald, watching this exchange, shook his head in disgust. This is exactly what's wrong with America these days. Special treatment for certain people who can't follow basic rules the rest of us manage to abide by. He raised his voice slightly, clearly intending to be heard by surrounding passengers. When I started flying first class 20 years ago, it meant something. Now they let just about anyone in as long as they can play the race card when they don't get their way. Amber made no attempt to address Gerald's explicitly racist comment. Instead, she chuckled lightly, a sound clearly captured by Isaiah's recording devices. I understand your frustration, Mr. Whitfield, she said, loud enough for Isaiah to hear. Rest assured, Lincoln Airlines still values our premium customers. Isaiah opened his briefcase, removed his medication, and took it with a small sip from a new water bottle he carried. He documented the time in his phone notes, maintaining a record of the incident. Senior Flight Attendant Taylor Brooks, who had been working in the main cabin, entered the first-class section just in time to witness the tail end of the confrontation. Her expression registered concern as she observed Amber's dismissive attitude toward Isaiah and preferential treatment of Gerald. Taylor approached carefully. Is everything all right here? Everything's fine, Amber replied quickly. Just a passenger creating difficulties again. Taylor glanced between Amber and Isaiah, then at Sophia who had returned to her seat. Something in her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced by Amber's characterization of the situation. What do you think about what's happening on this flight? Would you have stood up like Sophia did, or stayed quiet to avoid conflict? Comment number 1 if you believe Amber is clearly showing racial bias, or number 2 if you think there might be more to the story than we're seeing. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe if you want more real stories about confronting discrimination. How far do you think this situation will escalate? The flight is only halfway through, and tensions are already at a breaking point. What would you do if you were in Isaiah's position? Let's see what happens next. Taylor Brooks had been flying with Lincoln Airlines for 15 years, and something about this situation didn't sit right with her. After observing the interaction between Amber, Isaiah, and Gerald, she decided to investigate further. As Amber moved toward the galley, Taylor followed her. "Amber, what's the situation with the gentleman in 2A?" Taylor asked quietly. Amber rolled her eyes. "Just a difficult passenger making demands and playing the victim. Mr. Whitfield in 2B is a Diamond Elite member, and this guy is making his flight miserable." Taylor's brow furrowed. "Has he done something specific that's disruptive?" "He's been confrontational since boarding, questioning our procedures, making accusations about preferential treatment." "You know the type," Amber replied dismissively. Taylor nodded noncommittally. "I'll check in with him myself." "Suit yourself," Amber shrugged. "But the captain's already been involved once." Taylor made her way to Isaiah's seat. Gerald had excused himself to use the lavatory, providing an opportunity for a more private conversation. "Sir," Taylor addressed Isaiah, "I'm Taylor Brooks, the senior flight attendant. I wanted to check if everything's alright and if there's anything you need for the remainder of our flight." Isaiah studied her face, assessing whether this was a genuine inquiry or another setup. "Thank you for asking. To be honest, I've experienced concerning treatment during this flight. I'm Dr. Isaiah Washington, heading to Boston to present research at a medical conference." Taylor's expression softened. "I apologize if your experience hasn't been up to our standards, Dr. Washington. Could you tell me what's happened?" Isaiah gave her a concise summary of the events: the seating confrontation, Gerald's discriminatory comments, Amber's one-sided enforcement of policies, and the medication incident. "I understand this puts you in a difficult position," Isaiah concluded. "I'm not looking to create problems for anyone. I simply want to be treated with the same respect afforded to other passengers." Taylor nodded thoughtfully. "I appreciate your candor, Dr. Washington. What you're describing isn't aligned with our company values or policies. Would you prefer to move to another seat for the remainder of the flight? I have an open spot in row 4. Isaiah considered the offer but shook his head. "Thank you, but no. Moving would suggest I've done something wrong or that I'm the problem that needs to be relocated. I've done nothing to warrant being moved." "I understand completely," Taylor replied. "I'll be personally overseeing the first-class cabin for the remainder of the flight. Please don't hesitate to let me know if you need anything." As Taylor turned to leave, Isaiah added, "I should mention that I'm documenting these incidents. Not to create trouble, but because I've learned through experience that without evidence, these situations often become one person's word against another's." Taylor paused, meeting his gaze. "I understand. For what it's worth, I believe your account of the events." Gerald returned from the lavatory, scowling when he saw Taylor speaking with Isaiah. He resumed his seat with exaggerated caution, as if Isaiah might contaminate him through proximity. Across the aisle, Sophia caught Isaiah's attention. "How are you holding up?" she asked quietly. "I'm fine," Isaiah assured her. "Thank you for your support earlier." Sophia leaned closer. "I've experienced my share of discrimination, though perhaps not as blatant as what you're dealing with today. I'm Dr. Sophia Chen, by the way. Immunology research at Northwestern. Dr. Isaiah Washington, neurosurgery at Atlanta Memorial." "I recognized your name from your research publications," Sophia acknowledged. "Your work on neural regeneration pathways is groundbreaking." Their conversation was interrupted by a cabin announcement about upcoming turbulence. Isaiah noticed that Amber, who had returned to the cabin, provided detailed safety instructions to every first-class passenger except him. Taylor, observing this, approached Isaiah herself. "Dr. Washington, we're expecting some turbulence ahead. Please make sure your seatbelt is fastened and your tray table is secured." The simple act of being treated with basic professional courtesy shouldn't have felt remarkable, but in the context of the flight, it did. Isaiah thanked her with a nod. As the aircraft entered the patch of turbulence, the cabin lights dimmed temporarily. In the semi-darkness, Sophia leaned across the aisle again. "I want you to know I'm recording too," she whispered. "I started after that first confrontation. What's happening here isn't right, and I'm happy to be a witness if needed." Isaiah felt a surge of gratitude. So often in these situations, bystanders remain silent, unwilling to involve themselves or risk their own comfort. Sophia's willingness to stand as an ally meant more than she likely realized. "I appreciate that more than I can express," he replied quietly. Gerald, who had been pretending to nap, opened his eyes at their exchange. "Conspiring now, are we? How typical." Isaiah ignored the comment, focusing instead on reviewing his presentation notes on his tablet. The turbulence subsided, and Taylor conducted a brief beverage service, ensuring Isaiah received the same level of attention as other passengers. When she served Gerald, his demeanor was noticeably frosty toward her, apparently viewing her fair treatment of Isaiah as a betrayal of some unspoken alliance. Amber, meanwhile, seemed increasingly agitated by Taylor's involvement. She hovered near the galley, watching their interactions with obvious disapproval. When Taylor stepped away briefly, Amber approached Gerald. "I apologize for any inconvenience, Mr. Whitfield," she said in a hushed tone that Isaiah's recording nevertheless captured clearly. "Some of our staff don't understand the importance of maintaining certain standards. I've noted your account in our system for special consideration on future flights." The message was clear. Amber was apologizing for Taylor's equal treatment of Isaiah, suggesting it represented a lowering of standards rather than basic human decency. Isaiah documented the exchange in his notes, maintaining his outward composure while gathering evidence of the systematic discrimination unfolding around him. This wasn't just about one difficult flight, it was about a pattern of behavior that affected countless travelers who might not have the means or opportunity to prove what had happened to them. As the plane began its initial descent toward Boston, Isaiah sent a text to his attorney, Devin Mitchell. "Experiencing significant discrimination on Lincoln Airlines Flight 2187. Recording everything. May need your counsel upon landing." The response came quickly, "Document everything. Don't delete any recordings. Call me as soon as you land." Isaiah put his phone on airplane mode again, preparing for landing. Despite the stress of the flight, he felt a strange sense of calm. Years of facing subtle and not-so-subtle discrimination had prepared him for moments like this. The difference this time was that he had irrefutable evidence and the resources to pursue accountability. Taylor returned to check that all seats were in the upright position for landing. "We'll be on the ground in about 20 minutes, Dr. Washington. I hope the remainder of your flight is uneventful." "Thank you, Taylor," Isaiah replied. "I appreciate your professionalism." As they began the final approach to Boston Logan International Airport, Isaiah knew the real challenge would come after landing. The recordings he'd gathered would tell a story that could no longer be dismissed as a misunderstanding or a matter of perception. The truth would be undeniable, and the consequences, he suspected, would extend far beyond this single flight. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their final approach to Boston Logan International Airport. The seatbelt sign illuminated, and flight attendants began their landing preparations. "Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened, your tray tables are stowed, and your seats are in the upright position," Taylor announced, moving through the first-class cabin to verify compliance. Isaiah had already secured his area, his tablet safely tucked away in the seat pocket. Gerald, however, was making a show of adjusting his seat with deliberate slowness, as if to emphasize his entitlement to take as much time as he pleased. "Sir," Taylor addressed Gerald politely, "we need to prepare for landing. Could you please place your seat in the upright position?" Gerald sighed dramatically before complying. As his seat moved forward, he deliberately extended his elbow into Isaiah's space, nudging him. Isaiah shifted slightly to avoid contact, but the first-class seats, though spacious, still placed passengers in relative proximity. The shared armrest between them became an unspoken battleground. "Excuse me," Isaiah said calmly, "but you're extending into my space." Gerald turned, his expression contemptuous. "This armrest is for both passengers." "I agree," Isaiah replied evenly. "Which is why I've been careful to use only half of it." Gerald's jaw tightened. "Look," he said, his voice low but intense, "I don't appreciate being lectured about airplane etiquette by someone who clearly doesn't belong here." The statement hung in the air, its implication unmistakable. Isaiah kept his recording devices active, knowing that this unfiltered moment revealed the true nature of Gerald's animosity. "I have the same right to be in this seat as you do," Isaiah stated firmly. "I purchased a ticket, same as you." "A ticket you probably got discounted," Gerald snapped. "Or maybe your hospital has some diversity quota they need to fill with their travel budget." Isaiah took a measured breath. "Mr. Whitfield, your assumptions about me are both incorrect and inappropriate. I'm simply asking you to respect the physical boundaries of our seating arrangement." Gerald's face flushed with anger. Suddenly, he shoved Isaiah's arm off the shared armrest, the movement deliberate and forceful. "Don't tell me what's appropriate," Gerald hissed. "I was flying first class when you were probably still in some affirmative action college program." The physical contact, though brief, was clearly aggressive. Several nearby passengers witnessed the interaction, their expressions ranging from shock to discomfort. Amber, who had been monitoring the cabin from nearby, immediately rushed over, not to address Gerald's physical aggression, but to confront Isaiah. "Sir," she said sharply, "is there a problem here again?" "Mr. Whitfield just physically pushed my arm," Isaiah explained calmly. "I would like this incident formally documented." Amber's expression hardened. "I didn't see any physical contact." "Mr. Whitfield, did you push this gentleman's arm?" Gerald adopted an expression of innocent confusion. "Absolutely not. I was simply adjusting my position for landing when he accused me of invading his space. If anything, he's been the aggressor throughout this flight." Amber nodded sympathetically. "I understand, Mr. Whitfield." "Sir," she turned to Isaiah with a warning look, "we've had multiple issues with you during this flight. If you continue to create disturbances, I'll need to involve the air marshal." Isaiah maintained his composure, though the blatant misrepresentation of events was infuriating. "I would like to speak with the captain upon landing and file a formal complaint about the treatment I've received on this flight." "You're welcome to contact customer service after we land," Amber replied dismissively. "For now, I need you to remain calm and stop antagonizing other passengers." Taylor, who had been assisting another passenger, approached the situation. "What's happening here?" Before Amber could respond, Sophia spoke up from across the aisle. "That man," she pointed to Gerald, "just physically pushed Dr. Washington's arm off the armrest. I saw it clearly, as did several other passengers. And now this flight attendant is threatening Dr. Washington instead of addressing the actual aggression." Amber turned to Sophia with barely concealed hostility. "Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. Please focus on preparing for landing." Taylor assessed the situation quickly. "Amber, I'll handle this. Please check that the rear of the cabin is secured for landing." Amber hesitated, clearly reluctant to relinquish control of the situation. "The captain specifically asked me to monitor this passenger after the earlier disruption." "I'm the senior flight attendant," Taylor reminded her firmly. "I'll take responsibility for this section." Amber retreated with obvious displeasure. Taylor turned to both men. "Gentlemen, we're about to land. Whatever the issue is, I need both of you to remain in your seats with your seatbelts fastened until we reach the gate." As Taylor moved away, Gerald leaned toward Isaiah, speaking in a low voice that only Isaiah could hear. "People like you are the reason this country is going downhill. When we land, you'd better hope we don't run into each other again in Boston." The thinly veiled threat sent a chill through Isaiah. He remained outwardly calm, but activated his phone's video recording function, placing it on his lap to capture any further interactions. The aircraft descended through clouds, the city of Boston coming into view below. The captain's voice announced their final approach, instructing flight attendants to prepare for landing. Amber returned to the forward cabin, whispering something to Taylor that caused her expression to shift to concern. Taylor then moved to the intercom, making an announcement that caused Isaiah's stomach to tighten. "Ladies and gentlemen, the captain has requested that all passengers remain seated upon arrival at the gate. Security personnel will be boarding the aircraft before anyone disembarks. We appreciate your cooperation." Gerald smirked at Isaiah. "Looks like someone's in trouble." Isaiah knew exactly what was happening, a scenario that had played out countless times throughout history. A black man facing false accusations, his word dismissed in favor of those perceived as more credible based solely on race and status. But this time was different. This time, there was irrefutable evidence. As the plane touched down on the runway and taxied toward the gate, Isaiah sent a quick text to his attorney, "Landing now. Security meeting plane. All recorded. Call you once I'm clear." The aircraft came to a stop at the gate, the seatbelt sign remained illuminated, and passengers were instructed to stay seated. Minutes later, 2 airport security officers boarded the plane, followed by a Lincoln Airlines representative in a suit. Amber immediately approached them, pointing directly at Isaiah. "That's him." The security officers moved toward Isaiah's seat. "Sir, we need you to gather your belongings and come with us," the taller officer stated. Isaiah remained calm. "May I ask what this is regarding?" "We've received reports of disruptive behavior during the flight," the officer replied. "We need to discuss this in private." Isaiah nodded. "I understand. Before we proceed, I want to make you aware that I have recorded the entirety of my interactions on this flight, documenting a pattern of discriminatory treatment and false accusations." The security officers exchanged glances, clearly not expecting this response. Sophia stood up from her seat. "Officers, I've witnessed everything. This man has been subjected to racist comments and discriminatory treatment throughout the flight. I've recorded much of it myself and am willing to provide a statement." Several other passengers in nearby seats began to speak up as well. "I heard the other gentleman make racist remarks," a woman 3 rows back said. "The flight attendant with the blonde hair was clearly treating him differently," added a businessman from the opposite aisle. The airline representative, who had been silently observing, stepped forward. "Sir, I'm Bernard Hayes from Lincoln Airlines Customer Relations. Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private." Isaiah gathered his belongings, including his briefcase and carry-on. "I'm happy to speak with you, Mr. Hayes, but I want to be clear that I've done nothing wrong. What I've experienced today is textbook discrimination, and I have evidence to prove it." As Isaiah moved toward the exit, followed by the security officers and Bernard Hayes, he passed Gerald, who sat smugly in his seat. But the smug expression faltered as he noticed several passengers openly glaring at him, having witnessed his behavior and heard his comments. Taylor caught Isaiah's eye as he passed, her expression conveying a silent apology. Amber, meanwhile, stood near the cockpit door with Captain Palmer, both watching with concern as their narrative began to unravel. Isaiah stepped off the plane into an uncertain situation, but armed with truth and evidence, tools that had too often been denied to those who came before him in similar circumstances. The jetway felt unnaturally long as Isaiah walked between the 2 security officers, Bernard Hayes trailing slightly behind them. His mind raced with calculations. He had 20 minutes to make his connecting flight to the medical conference where he was scheduled to present groundbreaking research. 20 minutes that were rapidly disappearing into this detention. "This way, sir," the taller officer directed, guiding him not toward the terminal but to a small door off the jetway that led to a private security area. Isaiah followed, maintaining his composure while sending a quick final text to his attorney before they entered the secure area where he might lose signal, being detained by airport security. "Room off gate B12. Evidence secure." The response came instantly, "On my way. Say nothing substantive. Request lawyer if questioned." They entered a sterile room containing only a metal table and 4 chairs. The walls were bare except for a Lincoln Airlines logo and a security camera in the upper corner. Isaiah noted the camera with some relief, additional documentation of whatever was about to unfold. "Please have a seat, Dr. Washington," Bernard Hayes gestured to one of the chairs. "I apologize for this inconvenience." Isaiah sat down, placing his phone face up on the table. "I'd like to clarify something immediately. My phone has been recording since before I boarded the aircraft. I have documentation of every interaction that occurred during this flight." The security officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Recording without consent may be problematic in itself," the shorter officer suggested. "Massachusetts is a two-party consent state," Isaiah acknowledged, "but federal aircraft regulations fall under different jurisdiction, and I was recording for my own protection in a public space where there's no reasonable expectation of privacy." Additionally, the aircraft safety announcement explicitly stated that the flight was being recorded for security purposes. His calm recitation of relevant legal statutes caused Bernard Hayes to study him with newfound interest. "You seem well versed in legal matters for a doctor," Hayes observed. "When you've experienced discrimination as frequently as I have, you learn the laws that protect you," Isaiah replied evenly. "Now, I have a medical conference where I'm presenting research that could help thousands of patients with traumatic brain injuries. I'd appreciate if we could address whatever concerns brought us here quickly." The door opened, and a third security officer entered, whispering something to the others. Their expressions shifted subtly. "Dr. Washington," the taller officer began, "we've received conflicting reports about incidents that occurred on your flight. Flight attendant Amber Reynolds reported that you were confrontational, disruptive, and made physical contact with another passenger." "All false," Isaiah stated firmly. "And my recordings prove it. We've also received statements from several other passengers who witnessed the events," the officer continued. "Their accounts contradict Ms. Reynolds' version." Isaiah nodded. "I'm not surprised. Truth tends to find its way to the surface eventually." Bernard Hayes leaned forward. "Dr. Washington, would you be willing to share your recordings with us? It would help clarify the situation." "I'd be happy to play portions that establish what actually occurred," Isaiah agreed, "though I'd prefer to consult with my attorney before releasing the full recordings." He queued up a segment from earlier in the flight, where Gerald explicitly made the comment about affirmative action passengers, and Amber's failure to address it. He followed with the recording of Gerald physically pushing his arm and Amber's subsequent accusation that Isaiah was the aggressor. The room fell silent as the recordings played. The clear evidence of discrimination, and the flight crew's complicity, was undeniable. Bernard Hayes' professional demeanor cracked slightly, his expression troubled. "This is concerning." "What's concerning," Isaiah replied, "is that I nearly missed an important medical presentation because your employee chose to support discriminatory behavior rather than enforce your company's own policies against harassment." The door opened again, and Sophia Chen entered, escorted by another security officer. Dr. Chen insisted on providing a statement, the officer explained. "I witnessed everything," Sophia said firmly. "And I have my own recordings that corroborate Dr. Washington's account." Another knock at the door revealed Taylor Brooks, the senior flight attendant. "I need to speak with Mr. Hayes," she said, her expression determined. The small room was becoming crowded with witnesses, all contradicting the official narrative that had led to Isaiah's detention. Bernard Hayes ran a hand through his hair, visibly reassessing the situation. "Dr. Washington, I think there's been a serious misunderstanding." "No," Isaiah corrected him, "there's been a serious case of discrimination, followed by false accusations that could have damaged my reputation and career. That's not a misunderstanding, it's a potential legal liability." The word liability seemed to resonate with Hayes, who straightened his posture. "Let me see what I can do to resolve this situation quickly and get you to your conference." As Hayes stepped out to make a call, Isaiah checked his watch. His presentation was scheduled to begin in 45 minutes. Even if he left immediately, he would barely make it. The security officers, now seeing the direction the evidence was pointing, adopted a more conciliatory tone. "We're just doing our job, sir," the taller one explained. "When we receive reports from flight crew, we have to investigate." "I understand," Isaiah replied. "But I hope you also understand how these systems can be weaponized against people who look like me. If I didn't have recordings, this would be my word against theirs, and historically, we know whose word tends to be believed." Bernard Hayes returned, accompanied by another man in a more expensive suit. "Dr. Washington, this is James Keller, Lincoln Airlines Chief Legal Counsel for the Northeast region." The presence of the airline's lawyer confirmed what Isaiah already suspected. They recognized the seriousness of what had occurred. "Dr. Washington," Keller began, "on behalf of Lincoln Airlines, I want to extend our sincere apologies for your experience today. We've reviewed the preliminary evidence and witness statements, and it's clear that you were subjected to treatment that falls far below our standards." "I appreciate the acknowledgement," Isaiah responded, "but an apology doesn't address the systemic issues that allowed this to happen." "We understand," Keller continued smoothly. "We'd like to offer immediate compensation and an upgrade to your return flight. Additionally, we're prepared to discuss a more substantial settlement if you're willing to sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding this incident." And there it was, the attempt to buy silence, to prevent this incident from becoming public and forcing real change. Isaiah shook his head. "I'm not interested in an NDA. What happened today isn't just about me. It's about a pattern of behavior that affects countless travelers who don't have the means or opportunity to prove what happened to them." Keller's professional smile faltered slightly. "Perhaps we could discuss this further after your conference. We could arrange a meeting with our executive team." "My attorney will be in contact," Isaiah replied firmly. "For now, I need to get to my presentation." The door opened once more, revealing a man in his early 40s with a leather briefcase and an expression of controlled fury. "I'm Devin Mitchell, Dr. Washington's attorney," he announced without preamble. "My client has been illegally detained based on demonstrably false accusations. We'll be discussing appropriate remedies for this situation, but first, he has a medical conference to attend." Bernard Hayes nodded quickly. "Of course. We've arranged for priority transportation to get Dr. Washington to his venue as quickly as possible." As they gathered Isaiah's belongings and prepared to leave, Sophia approached him. "I've given them my contact information as a witness," she said. "What they did was wrong, and I won't stay silent about it." Isaiah felt a profound gratitude for her allyship. "Thank you, Dr. Chen. Your willingness to speak up made a difference." Taylor Brooks also stepped forward. "I've provided a statement about what I observed," she said quietly. "I should have intervened sooner. I'm sorry." Isaiah nodded his acknowledgement. Standing up for what's right is rarely easy, but it's always necessary. As they exited the room, Isaiah glimpsed Gerald Whitfield being escorted into another security area, his expression no longer smug but anxious. Amber Reynolds stood nearby, engaged in what appeared to be an intense conversation with airline officials. Devin Mitchell walked alongside Isaiah as they hurried through the terminal. "Based on what you sent me and the recordings you've made, we have a very strong case," he said. "Discrimination, defamation, false imprisonment, multiple causes of action." "I need to focus on my presentation first," Isaiah replied. "But afterward, we need to talk about making sure this doesn't happen to someone else." They reached the curb where a Lincoln Airlines courtesy vehicle waited to rush him to the conference venue. As Isaiah settled into the back seat, he felt the weight of what had just occurred, the familiar burden of having to prove his humanity and right to dignity, but also the rare satisfaction of having irrefutable evidence to support his truth. His phone buzzed with a notification, a news alert from a local Boston station about a developing situation at Logan Airport involving allegations of discrimination on a Lincoln Airlines flight. Someone, perhaps one of the passengers, perhaps Sophia, had already contacted the media. What had begun as a routine flight was quickly becoming something much larger, a potential catalyst for change in an industry where discrimination often occurred in transient spaces with little accountability. Isaiah took a deep breath, centering himself for the presentation ahead. The medical research he was about to share could help thousands of patients with traumatic brain injuries. That remained his primary mission today. But he also recognized that the evidence he'd gathered could help address a different kind of injury, the systemic wounds inflicted by unchecked discrimination and the institutions that enabled it. The conference hall buzzed with anticipation as Isaiah concluded his presentation on neural regeneration therapies. Despite arriving with barely minutes to spare, he had delivered his research findings with the same precision and clarity that characterized his surgical work. "Thank you for your attention," Isaiah addressed the assembled physicians and researchers. "I believe this approach offers new hope for patients with traumatic brain injuries who previously had limited options for recovery. I welcome your questions." For the next 15 minutes, he fielded complex inquiries from colleagues, his mind compartmentalizing the morning's events as he focused on the science that had brought him to Boston. This ability to maintain composure under pressure, honed through years in the operating room and countless experiences with discrimination, served him well in both contexts. As the session concluded and attendees filed out of the hall, Dr. Sophia Chen approached the podium. "Brilliant presentation," she said. "Especially considering the circumstances." Isaiah smiled, genuinely appreciative of her support. "Thank you for everything you did on the flight. Most people would have stayed silent." "I've stayed silent too many times before," Sophia admitted. "It gets harder to live with yourself each time you do." They were interrupted by Isaiah's phone buzzing with a message from Devin Mitchell, "Meeting room secured at hotel adjacent to conference center. Lincoln Airlines representatives waiting. Strategic discussion needed before proceeding." Isaiah showed the message to Sophia. "Looks like things are moving quickly." "They're in damage control mode," Sophia observed. "Videos from passengers are already circulating online. The one showing Gerald pushing you and Amber blaming you has over 100,000 views." The realization that their experience had already entered the public domain was both surprising and validating. Isaiah had intended to pursue accountability, but the viral nature of what had occurred accelerated the timeline dramatically. "I should go," Isaiah said. "But I'd appreciate your perspective on this if you have time later." "Absolutely," Sophia replied, handing him her business card. "My presentation isn't until tomorrow. Call me if you need another voice in the room." 20 minutes later, Isaiah entered a hotel conference room where Devin Mitchell was already engaged in conversation with 3 Lincoln Airlines representatives, Bernard Hayes, James Keller, and a woman who introduced herself as Veronica Winters, Senior Vice President of Customer Experience. "Dr. Washington," Veronica greeted him with a practiced corporate smile. "Thank you for meeting with us. First, let me extend our deepest apologies for your experience on our flight today." Isaiah took a seat beside Devin. "I appreciate the sentiment, Ms. Winters, but I'm more interested in substantive changes than apologies." "Understandable," she nodded. "We want to address this situation comprehensively." Devin placed a tablet on the table. "Before we continue, I should inform you that we've been contacted by multiple news organizations seeking comment about the incident. Several passengers posted videos online that have gained significant traction." Keller's expression tightened. "Which is why we'd like to discuss an appropriate settlement that acknowledges the seriousness of the situation while allowing all parties to move forward." "By move forward, I assume you mean buying Dr. Washington's silence," Devin replied evenly. "We're prepared to offer substantial compensation," Veronica interjected. $300,000, with the standard confidentiality provisions. Isaiah and Devin exchanged glances. The offer was significant but clearly designed to make the problem go away rather than address its roots. "That's not going to work," Isaiah stated firmly. "This isn't about money. It's about accountability and preventing this from happening to others." "Dr. Washington," Keller leaned forward, "I understand your desire for justice, but litigation is lengthy, unpredictable, and personally draining. The offer we're making represents our good faith effort to make amends without subjecting you to that process." Devin opened his laptop. "Let me be clear about our position. We have documented evidence of racial discrimination by your employee and a passenger. We have evidence of your crew member making false accusations that led to Dr. Washington's detention. We have multiple witness statements corroborating our account. And now we have viral social media content creating a PR crisis for your airline. Veronica's professional veneer cracked slightly. What exactly are you seeking, Mr. Mitchell? A comprehensive response, Devon replied. One that addresses both the individual incident and the systemic issues it reveals. Isaiah spoke up. I want 3 things. First, accountability for the individuals involved. Second, transparent changes to your training and procedures to prevent similar incidents. Third, a significant investment in programs that address discrimination in commercial air travel. The airline representatives exchanged glances, clearly not expecting such specific demands. We'd need to consult with our executive team about the policy aspects, Veronica hedged. As for the individuals involved, we've already placed Flight Attendant Reynolds on administrative leave pending investigation. And Captain Palmer? Isaiah asked. He accepted her version of events without question and authorized security to meet the aircraft. Bernard Hayes shifted uncomfortably. The captain was acting on information provided by his crew. Information that was false and discriminatory, Devon countered. His failure to investigate both sides reflects either poor judgment or implicit bias, neither of which is acceptable for someone in his position. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. An assistant entered and whispered something to Veronica, whose expression grew increasingly concerned. Excuse me, she said, stepping out of the room. In the momentary lull, Devon showed Isaiah something on his tablet, a news article that had just been published online. Lincoln Airlines faces discrimination allegations as passenger videos go viral. Veronica returned, her corporate composure noticeably strained. Dr. Washington, Mr. Mitchell, I've just been informed that our CEO has requested direct involvement in this matter. He would like to schedule a video conference within the hour to discuss resolution. The sudden escalation to the highest levels of the company signaled the severity with which they now viewed the situation. What had begun as a routine flight had transformed into a potential landmark case with implications for the entire industry. We'll need time to prepare, Devon replied. Let's reconvene in 2 hours. As the airline representatives left the room, Isaiah turned to Devon. They're scared. They should be, Devon agreed. The evidence is overwhelming, and the public response is gathering momentum. But we need to be strategic about our next steps. Isaiah nodded thoughtfully. I'd like to bring Dr. Chen into this discussion. Her perspective as a witness and her own experiences with discrimination would be valuable. Devon began organizing his notes. Good idea. And while we're waiting, I've been contacted by 3 other passengers from your flight who want to provide statements. One of them mentioned that Flight Attendant Reynolds has a history of similar behavior. Apparently, she was transferred from international routes after complaints from several passengers of color. This revelation suggested a pattern that the airline had failed to address, possibly moving the problem around rather than solving it. The implications were significant for their case. Isaiah's phone buzzed with another notification. A text from Taylor Brooks, I've given my full statement to HR and the investigative team. They're also reviewing my previous reports about Amber's behavior that were ignored. I'm willing to go on record if needed. The evidence continued to accumulate, painting a picture not just of individual bias but of institutional failure to address known problems. Devon, Isaiah said, I think we need to expand our focus. This isn't just about one flight attendant or one passenger. It's about an airline culture that allowed this to happen despite previous warnings. Devon nodded in agreement. Exactly. And that changes both our strategy and the scope of appropriate remedies. As they prepared for the upcoming video conference with the CEO, Isaiah felt a complex mix of emotions. The discrimination he'd experienced was painfully familiar, but the opportunity to create meaningful change was rare. With irrefutable evidence, multiple witnesses, and growing public attention, they had leverage that could translate into systemic improvements. His phone buzzed again, this time with a news alert. A major network was running a segment on the incident during their evening broadcast. What had started in the confined space of an aircraft cabin was now playing out on a national stage. The door opened, and Sophia Chen entered, bringing with her additional perspective and another voice for accountability. Together, they began formulating a response that would transform a personal injury into a catalyst for institutional change. The darkest moment had passed. Resolution was beginning to take shape, not just for Isaiah, but potentially for countless travelers who would come after him. 6 months later, Isaiah Washington stood at the courtroom steps in downtown Boston, the early autumn sun warming his face as cameras flashed and reporters jostled for position. Devin Mitchell stood beside him, along with Sophia Chen, who had flown in from Chicago for this moment. The judge had just announced the final approval of a historic $30 million settlement between Isaiah and Lincoln Airlines, the largest discrimination settlement in commercial aviation history. But the monetary figure, while significant, was just one component of a much broader agreement. "Dr. Washington, how do you feel about today's ruling?" called out a reporter from the front of the crowd. Isaiah stepped toward the microphones. "Today isn't about a personal victory. It's about accountability and systemic change. The settlement includes comprehensive reforms that will benefit all travelers, particularly those from marginalized communities who have long faced discrimination in commercial air travel." The terms of the settlement had indeed gone far beyond financial compensation. Lincoln Airlines had agreed to implement mandatory anti-bias training for all staff, revise their complaint investigation procedures, and establish an independent diversity advisory board with real authority to recommend policy changes. Most significantly, the airline had committed to creating the Air Travel Equality Initiative, a $15 million program to study and address discrimination across the industry, with participation from other major carriers who recognized the need for sector-wide improvements. "Can you tell us what happened to the flight attendant and passenger involved in the incident?" another reporter asked. Isaiah exchanged glances with Devin, who nodded slightly. "Amber Reynolds was terminated for violation of company policies and for making false statements that led to my detention," Isaiah explained. "Gerald Whitfield was placed on Lincoln Airlines' no-fly list and faced separate legal consequences for his actions." What he didn't mention was that Amber had attempted to file a wrongful termination lawsuit, which was quickly dismissed when the recordings were entered into evidence. Gerald, meanwhile, had faced his own professional repercussions when his behavior went viral. His real estate development firm had lost several major contracts from clients unwilling to be associated with his publicly documented racism. "Dr. Washington," called another journalist, "you could have accepted the initial settlement offer with a non-disclosure agreement. Why did you choose to pursue a more public resolution?" It was a question Isaiah had anticipated. Confidential settlements may provide individual compensation, but they don't create structural change. They allow patterns of discrimination to continue behind closed doors. By pursuing a public resolution, we created an opportunity for transparency and accountability that benefits everyone. Devin stepped forward. "I'd like to add that Dr. Washington has established the Neural Equity Foundation with a portion of the settlement funds. This foundation will work to address disparities in neurological healthcare for underserved communities, continuing Dr. Washington's commitment to ensuring that all patients have access to life-saving treatments regardless of their background." This announcement drew appreciative murmurs from the gathered press. The foundation represented Isaiah's determination to transform his negative experience into positive impact in his professional field as well. Sophia Chen moved to the microphones next. "As a witness to the original incident and throughout this process, I've seen firsthand how individual courage can drive institutional change. Dr. Washington could have simply endured the discrimination he faced, as so many do daily, but instead, he chose to stand up not just for himself, but for everyone who has ever been made to feel unwelcome or unsafe because of who they are." After answering a few more questions, the press conference concluded. As the reporters dispersed, a Lincoln Airlines representative approached Isaiah, Taylor Brooks, now promoted to Director of Cabin Services Training, a position created as part of the airline's restructuring. "Dr. Washington, she greeted him with genuine warmth. "I wanted to thank you personally. The changes you've helped implement have transformed our company culture. It hasn't been easy, but it's been necessary and long overdue." "How are the new training programs being received?" Isaiah asked. "There was resistance initially," Taylor admitted. "But the videos and case studies have been powerful tools for change. When people see concrete examples of discrimination rather than abstract concepts, it's harder to dismiss the impact." Isaiah nodded. "That's why documentation is so crucial. It transforms subjective experiences into objective evidence." As Taylor returned to her colleagues, Isaiah's phone buzzed with a notification. The Neural Equity Foundation's first research grant applications had opened today, with a focus on bringing cutting-edge neurological treatments to community hospitals in underserved areas. Devin approached with his tablet. "The settlement story is already trending nationally. Look at these responses." The comments section of a major news site's article showed overwhelmingly positive reactions, with many people sharing their own experiences with discrimination in travel and other public spaces. What had begun as one man's ordeal had opened a broader conversation about accountability, evidence, and institutional responsibility. "There's something else," Devin added. "The CEO of Lincoln Airlines has requested a private meeting with you. No lawyers, no PR team, just a conversation." Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "What do you think he wants?" "According to my contact, he's interested in having you join the airline's new ethics advisory board. Not as a token gesture, but because your perspective as both a medical professional and someone who has experienced discrimination firsthand would be valuable in shaping future policies." Isaiah considered this unexpected development. 6 months ago, he had been detained and nearly missed his medical presentation because of discriminatory treatment. Now, he was being invited to help transform the very company that had wronged him. "Tell him I'll consider it," Isaiah replied. "But my priority remains my medical work and the foundation." As they walked away from the courthouse, Sophia fell into step beside him. "So what happens now?" Isaiah looked up at the clear Boston sky, thinking about how far they had come since that turbulent flight. "Now we continue the work. The settlement is just the beginning. Real change happens in the everyday interactions, in the training sessions, in the policies that either enable or prevent discrimination." "And on a personal level?" Sophia pressed gently. Isaiah smiled. "I have a neural regeneration therapy trial starting next month that could help patients with traumatic brain injuries recover functions previously thought lost forever. That's always been my purpose, the reason I became a doctor in the first place." They reached the corner where they would part ways, Sophia to the airport for her flight back to Chicago, Isaiah to his hotel before tomorrow's return to Atlanta. "You know," Sophia said thoughtfully, "when I intervened on that flight, I never imagined we'd end up here. It reminds me that we never really know the full impact of standing up for what's right." "That's the nature of systemic change," Isaiah agreed. "It starts with individual actions that ripple outward in ways we can't predict." They said their goodbyes, promising to stay in touch about the foundation's work and the ongoing implementation of the airline's reforms. As Isaiah walked alone, he reflected on the journey from that first-class cabin to this moment of resolution. The recording that had begun as a personal protection measure had become a catalyst for industry-wide change. The discrimination he had experienced, painful though it was, had created an opportunity to address patterns that affected countless travelers. His phone buzzed again, a text from his daughter, Aaliyah, "Dad. Just saw you on the news. So proud of you. Can't wait to help with the foundation this summer." Isaiah smiled. Perhaps the most meaningful outcome of all was showing his daughter that injustice, when documented and confronted with determination, could be transformed into positive change. Later that evening, as Isaiah prepared for his return flight to Atlanta, on Lincoln Airlines, at their specific request and with a very different crew, he received one final call. It was from the airline's CEO, confirming their upcoming meeting and sharing news that the Air Travel Equality Initiative had already received commitments from 3 other major carriers to participate in the industry-wide reforms. What had begun with a recording on a single flight was now creating change across an entire industry. It wasn't perfect, and the work was far from complete, but it was meaningful progress, proof that accountability was possible, even in spaces where discrimination had long gone unchallenged. This story reveals several powerful truths about confronting racism in modern society. First, documentation is an essential tool for justice. Isaiah's recordings transformed subjective experiences into objective evidence that couldn't be dismissed. Second, individual courage can catalyze systemic change when people refuse to accept discrimination as inevitable. Third, allies like Sophia play a crucial role by validating experiences and sharing the burden of speaking up. The case demonstrates how institutions often protect discriminatory behavior until confronted with irrefutable evidence and public pressure. It also highlights how seemingly isolated incidents reflect broader patterns requiring structural solutions rather than individual settlements. Perhaps most importantly, Isaiah's response shows how converting personal injustice into advocacy creates lasting impact beyond any single incident. By establishing both legal precedent and educational initiatives, Isaiah ensured his experience would protect countless future travelers. His story reminds us that accountability is possible even in spaces where discrimination has traditionally gone unchallenged, and that documentation, determination, and strategic advocacy remain our most powerful tools against systemic racism. Have you ever witnessed discrimination and wondered what you could do? What would you have done if you were on that flight, stayed silent like most passengers, spoken up like Sophia, or recorded evidence like Isaiah? Comment below with your thoughts on the most effective ways to stand against racism. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to support more content that exposes injustice and celebrates those brave enough to fight it. Share this video with someone who needs to understand the power of documentation in confronting discrimination. Thank you for joining us for this powerful journey of accountability and transformation. Remember, systemic change begins with individual courage. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay compassionate, and never underestimate your power to make a difference.